Hello. Hope things are going well. It is class for Wednesday. What is the 13th? Um, actually filming this on Monday afternoon. Wait, Tuesday afternoon. Sorry. Wait. Tuesday afternoon. Actually, it'll make it Wednesday the 13th. Um, period 2. So what we're going to do is we will continue with chapter 30. And then actually, before we jump into it, I emailed some of you and said that we would go through some of these questions because I appreciate you guys doing the work, those of you that did, but a lot of your answers were incorrect or weren't complete. And instead of trying to explain it via email, I thought I would just add it in the video. For those of you that didn't do it, you should take this time to use what I'm telling you to complete your work and get it to me. So I'll go through the questions, answer them. I also said I would talk a little bit about overspecialization and kind of give you some examples of overspecialization. And then we can jump into what we have to do today. Hopefully it won't take that long. Make sure you are taking notes because at the end of chapter 30, which won't be today, but at the end of chapter 30, I will ask you to share your notes with me. So make sure that you are doing that. Feel free to write any comments you have down below, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. You can always shoot me an email with questions or WeChat as well. Okay, so I'm not going to forget to share my screen. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. We will actually start here, but we're actually not going to do that yet. We're going to go here. Okay, so we're actually going to go here. So I wanted to kind of go through the questions that I shared with you and kind of talk through the answers. If there's something you don't understand, again, shoot me an email or comment or reach out. Okay, so the first question says discuss an example. Let's just say an example. Discuss an example of a country that has overspecialized and been hurt by it. Please provide link. So the reason why I'm asking you to do this is a lot of your articles that you're going to get in paper 2 are going to be about this. So it's getting you a chance to look at some more articles. I know some of you struggled with it. I was hoping some of you would remember some discussions we had, but I haven't really gotten a great answer from many of you on this. The best example of overspecialization, besides the one that I gave you on Malaysia and rubber, is Venezuela. So Venezuela is a South American country on the northern part of South America, close to Central America and North America. And it is run by a dictator, which is kind of slowly changing, but it hasn't really changed yet. And the reason why this dictator is able to do what he does is because the majority of the people in the country make their wealth through oil. Venezuela is part of what's called OPEC, oil producing and exporting countries, I think is what it stands for. And it's a group of a couple countries that control the flow of oil, crude oil, to mostly the West, but other parts of the world as well. And the HL students would know that this is an example of an oligopoly. And they control so much of the power that they're able to set pricing on oil, which as a result makes those countries that have that power very, very wealthy. So for a very long time, mostly really the 90s and early 2000s, Venezuela was a very, very rich country. Well, certain people in that country were very, very rich because the oil economy was doing very, very well. But then as oil prices crashed and people had moved away from oil and a lot of economic sanctions were put on Venezuela because they were a dictatorship for the most part. It resulted in that one business doing poorly. And because it was the only example or the only major thing that that country did, it resulted in the economy falling apart. Their currency crashed, it became worthless. They eventually moved to using the US dollar. They've recently started to try to integrate their own currency back in, but it hasn't worked very well. Most multinational corporations that are still there actually pay in US dollar because that's what most people use nowadays, because their currency is it's worthless. So Venezuela is a really good example. Here's a article that's actually pretty recent about Venezuela and about just kind of some of the more recent happenings with it. I will post this link in the Manage Back post so that you can read through it if you'd like. It's pretty short. Might give you a little bit of context. And the good thing about using an article like this is that it provides you examples that you can then use on your paper twos. Because a lot of you struggle with giving real life examples. So if you get a question about for HL oligopolies, or if you get a question about overspecialization, then you could potentially talk about this. So I think you could bring this example into a couple other different things as well. Okay. Second question. Discuss why countries that focus on primary sector commodities will struggle with economic development in the long run. That links to this idea that we talked about last video, which was that there's not a lot of what's called margin in primary sector commodities. So I was talking to Star, sent me some messages about this, and I was talking to him about this, and what it said, what I was telling him was that think about share. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the person selling the chair, or do you want to be the person selling the wood for the chair? Well, you want to be the person selling the chair because the chair is going to make you more money than the wood will. There's a lot of different competition out there to get wood, but there's not as much competition for selling that specific type of chair. So you want to be in the manufacturing business and more reality, the service business, selling that chair than you do in the primary commodity as the people cutting down wood and selling that wood, because there's more money in it, and it's more sustainable in the long run to be the person selling the chairs than it is to be the person selling the wood. Because wood's a finite resource unless you manage it really well. So in the long term, you want to move into the person who in reality would be what's called vertically integrated, which means that you're the person who cuts down the chair or cuts down the wood, makes the chair, markets the chair, and sells the chair. That would in reality be what you want. Starbucks is a pretty good example of a company that does that. We actually, I think somewhere in this PowerPoint, there's an example of that. They've vertically integrated. Amazon's done some of this as well. They vertically integrate, meaning that they control all lines of production from when it starts to when it sells. And it's a good way to create development because you make the money when you're selling the product. You don't make the money as much when you're the one selling the commodities that go into the product, the wood or the copper or the zinc or the metals or the coal. Like that doesn't make as much money as the final product. Okay. Question 3. What would happen if the US applied a subsidy to their domestic production of cotton? Okay. So I got the whiteboard out for. So you should be drawing a subsidy graph, but you also need to make sure, because it's talking about domestic production, you would want to draw it in with the world price. I am going to pause this real quick and draw it, so you don't just have to watch me draw, and then I will start back up. All right, so let's see if this works. Hopefully you can see. Okay, so we've got a pretty simple self-explanatory graph. We've got a graph for the U.S. market for cotton. On the Y, we've got price of cotton. On the X, we've got quantity of cotton. We drew a supply domestic line. We drew a demand domestic line as well. And then we put in the world price there. And then we labeled off on the quantities at both axes on the world price as well. So what would happen is we would be consuming at zero Q1 domestically, and then we'd be consuming from Q1 to Q2 at the world. So you can see that we're going to be consuming before the subsidy at Q1, 0 Q1, and then after the subsidy, we're going to be consuming at Q1 to Q2. At the world price. This is all before the subsidy, at Q1 to Q2 at the world price. So what's going to happen is we are now going to shift our supply line to the right because of the subsidy. So we're going to be shifting the line like that for the subsidy, the new supply line in red. Make sure we're shifting supply, not demand. And it's going to look like this, which means that it's a horribly drawn line. We are going to be consuming, you can see that we're going to be consuming from 0 to Q3 domestically now, and we're going to be consuming from Q3 to Q2 on the, hold on. Yeah, Q3 to Q2 on the oil price. So you can see that we've lost, there's been a loss of welfare because we're being forced to consume at a higher price than we normally would have. And there's a loss of what's called world efficiency because of that. I will hold this up one more time. You can take a look and stop it if you need to. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. That's what your graph should have looked like. You should have used put a world price in there because it said domestic. So that means you need to look at it, what it looked like in the world as well. So let me reshare with you. Okay. That was 3. How would the idea of tariff escalation impact LDCs compared to MDCs? So it's going, because the competition is very strong, and because LDCs don't have the ability to compete at the level that an MDC would, LDCs are more susceptible to things like tariffs because they're less diversified than a larger a country would be. So like if you tariff one good in China, it wouldn't impact China that much. But if you're tariffing one good in a less developed country, and that's the thing they produce, then it could become very difficult. So yeah, they're not as able to handle tariffs as a bigger country might be able to. Okay, hopefully that helps. If you didn't finish it now, and send it to me. Okay, so okay, let's take a look. So we're going to look at how we can create economic growth and economic development through trade. So there's what's called import substitution, which is a pretty important key term for development. And the basic idea is that as you're developing, you want to try to look at what you're importing and then look at what you can switch from importing to domestic production. So it's what's called import substitution, which means that you're substituting an import for a domestic good. And what this would do is it would allow for domestic markets to grow, and hopefully they would be able to compete with international or international companies at some point. So usually the reason this happens is people push this idea of like nationalism and like you should buy from your own country. This is actually pretty common in China. It's pretty common in the US as well. It's like buying from your own people because you want to support them instead of buying what the cheapest product is or the best quality product. Instead, you buy based on where something is made because you want to support your own country. And if that works well, then it could lead to the growth of that industry, and then they would eventually gain economies of scale, and then they would be able to compete easier. You saw this with like Huawei when all this stuff was happening with Huawei, that there was a big push in China by the Chinese government and also by the Chinese people to stop buying Apple products because it was seen as an American product, and then to start buying Huawei products so that you could better support the government and better support a Chinese company. This happens all over the place. So how would they do this? Governments would organize people to push for the consumption of one product over another. And then sometimes as well, subsidies are given. So subsidies would be provided in a domestic market to encourage cheaper products, which then compete with the world price, which is exactly what we just talked about with cotton. It's actually probably not the best graph for this situation because it should actually include a world price. So yeah, the government would put in protectionist policies based on this, so a lot of this is actually stuff we just talked about. Okay, so kind of evaluating this shows up a lot. It's something that you will see in part D. It's actually something that could show up in a paper 3 as well for HL students. So it is something that you need to be aware of. Most likely it'll show up in paper 2s. So evaluating this, evaluating this. Advantages. You're obviously going to be protecting the domestic market, which means that you're going to be growing or helping unemployment. You're going to be protecting your own economy. And if it works, maybe in the long term, you're able to compete, and it could be better for everyone in the long term. It protects local culture. It makes sure that your economy isn't overrun by multinational corporations, and it protects the economy from the power of multinational corporations demanding things on countries and things like that. So there are some positives, especially if it works. It could be a big positive to your country. The disadvantages, is that you're forcing your people to buy a higher cost product most likely, or lesser quality. It gets rid of this idea of comparative advantage. It's what the economic way of saying that would be. It distorts comparative advantage, which means that you're not allowing the market to actually work the way it should. It may protect jobs in the short run. The reason why I say in the short run, because you can't subsidize forever. So unless the subsidies work and the companies become better producers, it wouldn't actually. You would eventually have to get rid of it. It leads to more inefficient producers producing. It could potentially lead to inflation. And if you are protecting your own industries, then other countries might decide to retaliate. So that is one. Those are some potential outcomes as a result of import substitution. Okay. I feel like we've been going for a while, so I will actually stop here and we'll pick up with export promotion next time. Okay. There's actually nothing that I need you to do at this point, except make sure you're keeping up with your notes. If you're missing things, please get it to me as soon as possible, especially your IAs. I will end us here. If you need anything, please let me know. You can leave comments on the video if you have any questions, or you could shoot me an email. I hope all is well. Hope you guys are doing well. If you need anything, let me know. Have a good one.